Hello and welcome to Conversations with Catholics with James Part 6.
Yep.
Welcome back, James. It's good to have you back on the show.
Good to be back. Finally broke the record.
Oh, I haven't been paying attention to it, but is this the one that breaks the record?
It does, yes.
Very nice. Very nice. Cool. Um, well, what a momentous occasion this is then. As I understand it, to mark this very momentous occasion, and for no other reason, you've started a new series on your channel, right? Oh, and your channel,
Yep.
by the way, is your channel as well as your previous 5 appearances on this channel are all linked in the description down below. But you've started a new series on your channel all about debunking arguments for God, but from somebody who does believe in God, right? Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yes. The name of the series is Dismantling Arguments for God. The reason I wanted to do it, and it actually started with the very first argument that I dismantled, is Anselm's ontological argument. All too often, I will see people critique ontological arguments in general, but specifically Anselm's argument. And in it, they claim that they are presenting Anselm's argument, but they're actually presenting the opposite argument. And as I admitted in that video, like when I first heard it, I hated the argument. Then I looked into it and I was like, oh no, this is actually a good argument. I like this argument, but I was still upset with it, looked into it a little bit more, and then I found out like why it still doesn't work. And I was like, oh, that's actually kind of cool. And I can rest easy now that I know that this actually isn't a good argument. But at the same time, I respected and appreciated the subtle beauty that was contained within the argument. It was almost like looking at an art piece, even though I could see the flaws, but it didn't detract from the beauty. Like if you go up close to a painting, you can see where the brush strokes are. But if you understand the technique, it's like, okay, even though I see the flaw, it's still a beautiful work of art. And so what I wanted to do was twofold. One, present an appreciation of these arguments as they actually were. And then two, do an honest critique of them when they fail. I don't have an editor. I don't have like anyone to check my scripts or anything like that in a professional capacity. I know Fides will look at it when he's got the time. But I am very cut and dry. And so after I posted the video, I was like, you know what? I wonder what ChatGPT would think of this script. And so I started playing around with it and seeing how it would have edited the script. And I did like how it did it. And I kicked myself because of this closing line it used that I'm like, that should have been in the video. Sometimes in our quest for truth, knowing why something is wrong is just as important as knowing why something is right. And it put into words what my motivation behind this series is that sometimes arguments that people put out for God don't work, and that's okay. Sometimes they only work within a particular worldview, and sometimes they just don't work, period. But that doesn't mean necessarily that there isn't anything invaluable in understanding what that argument is. And that's what I'm hoping to accomplish, is like, all right, let's look at what doesn't work. Let's look at what does work within the argument. And we can still appreciate it, but let's be better.
Yeah, I mean, I remember 11 years ago now when I was like a freshman in engineering school, I remember my professor saying that engineering and to a large extent this whole scientific project in general is just a large pile of failed experiments that we've all built on. That in science, really learning what doesn't work is equally as valuable as learning what does. And so when if you have a hypothesis and you're like, I think that when I do X, Y will happen, and then you do X and Y does not happen, that is super valuable because now you know that,
yes.
You learn something either way when you do the experiment. And so that's kind of what you reminded me of. I think that looking at arguments that maybe don't convince you is still a valuable experience for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And it it's a good way to kind of refer back to like our previous conversation of like looking at, you know, different sides in as strong light as possible. If you truly understand the argument and you understand why it doesn't work, then you're not afraid when someone else is critiquing it, and you also know the right way to critique it depending on your position with that particular argument.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. So you started with Anselm's argument as the first argument that you were critiquing in
Hmm.
this manner. Um,
Yep.
you mentioned something to the effect of like a lot of people think that it fails for one reason. Let's start there. What is that reason that everyone thinks that it fails for?
So there's two. The first is because they use the wrong definition that Anselm uses. Um, so in the video I mentioned, and I forget his name. In fact, his only notable work is his critique against Anselm, and you know, he messed up on that, unfortunately. But Anselm does a negative definition for God, coming from the classical tradition of you can't make positive statements about God. Now, people are like, well, we say God is infinite. Well, that's actually a negative statement because we're saying that God is not finite. So for Anselm, he says, God, it is self evident that God is that which nothing greater can be conceived. So he is not putting any limitations. It is a negative statement. And if you say that God is not something, there's still an infinite number of things that he could be. So it's unlimited. So to use a more down to earth example, Kevin is not a dog. Well, what do we know about that? Well, we don't know anything else other than him not being a dog.
Yeah, not to play semantics, but so I've got a
Mhm.
question for you. Um,
Yeah,
isn't what Anselm did a positive definition in the sense that he said God is that which is
not
no,
so God is that which nothing greater.
right,
So to
but
put it in
God
a more
is that which nothing great. So that's kind of be like Kevin's. That would be kind of like saying, um, Kevin is something which is not a dog, which like
yes, which is it
correct.
sounds positive, but it's still a negative statement.
Yeah. Like, I guess what's the
So
difference between saying Kevin is that which is not a dog versus Kevin is not a dog? Kind of.
yeah,
Yeah.
so it's more flowery language because as I mentioned in the video, this really started off as like a prayerful meditation, and it was one of those things where Anselm did write a lot on it, but it was just like one of those things where it started off as a meditation, and he just kind of came to this insight and just continuously meditated on that insight in a prayerful manner, and it just continuously went on and on and on and on. Um, Now, what a lot of people will do is they will then say, God is that, God is the greatest possible thing, or God is greatest possible thought, or God is that which, they're putting a positive statement onto it. So that right,
In the same way that those two statements are the same, like both the statement that Kevin
mhm.
is that which is not a dog, but also Kevin is not a dog, like those two are the same thing. Isn't that kind of the same thing to say God is that which nothing is greater could be conceived? Also, God is not whatever you can conceive unless you're conceiving the thing that is the greatest thing.
So the difference between the two, like the positive and the negative statement, is when you do a positive statement. So if I said Kevin is human, well, I've now put limitations and boundaries on that. And so by saying God is the greatest possible thing, or God is the greatest possible conceivable thing, or greatest possible, like whatever, however you want to do it, as soon as you turn it into a positive statement, it's now limited in some capacity. If God is the greatest possible thing, he's now limited by possibility. And you and I both know, based on our time on Reddit, everyone's going to have different ideas on what's possible. So that doesn't that's still a limiting factor though. Like some people will say, well, it's possible for there to be square circles in different dimensions and especially if you get into like non-Euclidean geometry on a like, and then you have someone say, no, you can't have a square circle. So what does it mean to be possible? It's still a limitation. If you say God is the greatest possible thought, now whatever we can conceive, that's all God is. But you and I would both agree that we are limited creatures and we have limits on what we can think. So once again, we're putting a limit on that. But by saying that God is that which nothing greater can be conceived, it doesn't matter what the limit of our thinking is, God is still greater than that. So it's kind of like, to put it this way, what Anselm does is essentially saying, all right, so you're thinking of an infinity? Well, infinity plus one.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess I might just not. I might not be
It's a
so.
hard
Well,
it's a hard thing to get into when you don't have the background that he's pulling from, but it has to do with that fact of like, no, you can only make negative statements about God, and that's why he phrases it that way, because that's the idea behind it, is by making a positive statement of any kind, you are now putting a limit on God. That's why even for like when you get into like the dogma of the divine simplicity and you're talking about the omni traits of God, it's talking about those are all analogies. Like whenever you make a positive statement about God, people are saying, no, those are analogies to God and not literal. So whenever you're making a statement about God that's literal and not an analogy, it's got to be a negative statement.
What about something like God is triune?
So that is describing the relationship of the persons. And that's getting into like,
Well, I didn't say that the
not the
persons are
essence
triune.
of,
I said God is triune because
yeah,
that
yeah.
I think a Catholic
So
has to
that's,
say that God is triune, right? A Catholic is not
so
allowed to
God,
say.
you're right. However, so that gets into the distinction that the Catholic Church makes between the persons and the essence. And so, to be a little bit more clear and more precise, whenever we're making a positive statement about God, as in God's essence, it has to be negative. So the Trinity is not a statement about God's essence.
Isn't God the only thing whose essence just is his existence? Like, so there is no difference between God and God's essence, right?
Between God's existence and his essence, yes.
Right, and God's existence is God, right?
That's a title that we put on. So it's the way that I've understood the word God is it's the same thing as king. It's a title we put on in this conversation, that which is the ultimate foundational reality of all of reality.
Would it be easier if I said like Yahweh or something like that instead of God? So that we just.
So so Yahweh is his name, which points to his essence. At least according to the traditional idea of what a name of a god is. So Yahweh, which is, I am, pointing to the idea of essence, his essence being existence, which you and I touched on a lot in my third appearance, where we went into my living paper on why I'm Catholic. But this is getting a little deep in the weeds. The main point is that a lot of people will make a positive definition for God when Anselm's making a negative definition, and within the worldview and structure of Anselm, those are two very completely different ideas. As if I was to say, all right, so Kevin, I understand you're anomalous, but you agree that there's an essence to a thing, because you agree that the thing's there and the essence is what the thing is, and you agree that the thing be like, you're going to be like, no, like you're completely missing the point. Even though you're trying to put it in your vernacular, you're missing the point within my worldview. And so it's the same thing for Anselm, is by putting a positive definition for God, you're missing the entire point and structure within Anselm's argument. Therefore, you're not actually critiquing Anselm's argument.
Okay, I'm gonna go with you on this one because I'm still not sure that I like. I think at the end of the day, so much of the ontological argument is just about semantics. Um,
So it kind of is, and I love the way that it actually does get debunked. And I know you expressed a concern about it, and it's kind of related to Kant. So after we touch on the second issue, um, we can touch on the Kant because I know you expressed it to something about the argument to me, and then I was like, man, I really feel like Kant's just asserting here. So I looked a lot deeper into it, and it had a eureka moment as far as like, oh, this is what's actually going on between Kant and Anselm. As
oh
far as go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say. I'm happy to kind of go with you in terms of the difference between the positive and the negative definitions.
Yeah,
Um, but then I think there's a next step here to well, I guess to your
yeah,
kind of video.
yeah. So the next common critique that also misses the point is, and this again touches on the last conversation, or yeah, the last conversation where I was talking about the redness. Like if we were to take just red, even excluding it as being a lightweight, just red as itself, that doesn't exist. It's a concept, but we're able to extract that concept. Um, the so what Anselm is doing the equivalent of saying, all right, so God is that redness, just red as is. There's no light wave aspect to it. It's just red. And then you come up and say, well, wait a minute, James here is wearing a red shirt. And since all of the stuff you said about red as is must exist on the red shirt as well, and then you're making an argument from ridiculousness or ad absurdum to try to disprove the argument. However, just because redness has certain properties, because it's, again, within Anselm's framework, because it exists as an accidental trait on something else, the essence of that other thing takes precedence over the redness. So just because an apple and a shirt are both red, it doesn't mean that traits from the apple must be found in the traits of the shirt, so to speak, because those essences take precedence. So the argument presented by the other individual about the perfect island, or the lost island, I'm sorry, um, where he says, imagine there's a lost island and such that no, and he does a positive definition as well. So even he missed that distinction, such that this is the greatest island ever. Even if we were to fix his argument of like that which no greater island could be conceived, he is now taking what is essential for God in Anselm and applying it as an accidental trait to something else. But go ahead.
Referring to existence here.
Just the that which nothing greater can be conceived. So Anselm goes to conclude that, well, that which nothing greater can be conceived, if it doesn't exist, leads to a contradiction, because now I can conceive something that does exist, which is, in his worldview, greater than not existing. And then from there, what ends up happening is, if I have an island, that which no greater island can be conceived, is there an inherent contradiction for an island not to exist?
No.
Therefore, because the essence overtakes the precedence, there's nothing necessitating that island to exist. However, because that which nothing greater can be conceived is the essence of the thing we're talking about, for it to not exist leads to a contradiction with its essence, which then leads Anselm to conclude that God must exist.
Isn't the whole thing about the island though? Well, not just the island. Isn't the whole thing
Mhm.
about Anselm's argument that, like, think about any kind of island,
Mhm.
or think about any kind of insert anything. But I'll just stick with island here. Think about how good it would be, and now think about how It either exists or it doesn't exist. The one that exists is better than the one that doesn't. Therefore, the greatest possible island is one that does exist. Isn't that kind of the point?
So one, you made a positive argument. So yes,
Sure.
the greatest possible island is one that does exist, but that doesn't necessitate it to exist because
Why not?
this within the worldview of that Anselm is working from. So the Aristotelian worldview,
11th
you have
century or whatever, right? Like,
yeah,
yeah.
you have essence, accidents, and then a unique type of accident called properties. Now, to help the listeners who might not be that familiar with it, the essence is what a thing is. You and I, in a previous conversation, said essence is the same thing as definition. It's what that thing has to be, because if it's not that or doesn't have one of those aspects, it's no longer that thing. So an accident is something that could be different that doesn't affect the essence of a thing. So, for example, you and I are both humans. Within the Aristotelian worldview, we both have the same essence. However, your hair is a lot longer than mine. Does that make you more human?
Yes.
Because you have more hair.
Checkmate.
So, with joking aside, but yeah, like if you were to go by the logic that is trying to be used by the people saying, oh, that island which no greater island can be conceived, so therefore it must exist, that's the same kind of logic that's being used there. If being a human being comprises of being a mammal, and in order to be a mammal comprises of having hair among other things, well then more hair means more human. But that's clearly not the case. So therefore an accidental property doesn't change what the essence of a thing is and can't give the thing more or less of it.
I guess, but we're not talking about like the most islandy island. We're just talking about the best island. And so
Which
likewise, we're not
bestness is an accident, because you can talk about the essence of an island, and the best island is an accidental descriptor of that island. That's why the second argument fails, because it's, again, only within the Aristotelian worldview.
right. I don't think that bestness would actually be an accident though. Like an accident of an island might be something like a
So
palm
would
trees.
you so within, if I'm remembering and understanding the theorem correct, it might be set theorem, but anyways, so like if you take all of something, you would be able to order it from least to greatest or worst to best, even a set of infinity. So at some point, there is a best, or at least a degree of betterness.
According to set theory?
I saw this video. It was talking about like the axiom of choice and how it showed that like we can prove, even if we can't show the set, that there's yeah, I think that's what it is. The well ordering principle. That's what it is. Because I just saw it like maybe a month or two ago. But the idea is that thanks to the axiom of choice, we can show that even for a set of infinity that's uncountable, we can prove, without necessarily showing it, that it's possible to order it from smallest to greatest.
Largest.
Correct. Smallest to largest.
Yeah. But it's not like we're talking about like, well, 7 is a better number than 8 or
Yes,
6. Like
yes.
it's just, no, 7 is
Correct.
a larger number.
Larger number.
Yeah.
Yes. So by that understanding and by that logic, we can do that with just about anything, if I'm understanding the principle correct. So we would also have, but if we were to say that better or greatness has an effect on the okay, fair enough.
And if
Um,
I recall, I think Will is a mathematician of sorts, if I
yeah,
remember.
and
Will can correct
like I
me.
said, I'm not an expert on it. I was like, I
I'm also
saw
not a
that, and
mathematician. My math extended to differential equations, and then I tapped out. Diff-EQ was hard enough. I thought that Calc 3 was good, but then I got to
yeah.
Diff-EQ, and I was like, ooh. So,
But by that logic, if we were to say that greatness has an effect on the essence, or that it changes the essence, then that means that there's different levels of humanity. And so there's a greater human and a lesser human. And that gets into some worldviews that I don't think anyone wants to touch with a
well,
10-foot pole.
Catholics are chill with this idea, correct? That there are better and worse humans. As so,
Mm-mm.
so
So
Jesus was
what
human,
I'm getting,
and so
yeah.
Jesus was not any better or worse than I am, right? I think every Catholic want to say no. Jesus was a better human than Kevin
So
was,
what Jesus did was he didn't commit sins.
right?
That what that doesn't do though is make his humanness better than your humanness. The what I'm getting at is
But he
racism
was a
essentially.
better human.
Morally, yes,
Yeah.
but he wasn't better in the sense of like whites are better than blacks.
No, of course not. But also, I think that's what Anselm was doing with God, kind of, because he's thinking about like like he's talking about like powerful and stuff like that. And like to
Not
me, powerful is the kind of the same thing as like moral. Um, you know,
so he's not doing that here when he's talking about greater. What Anselm is doing here when he's talking about greater is, and the point that I'm making is, so he's talking because he doesn't use the word God is that like when he's talking about God, he's what he's saying is that whatever you can think of, it's not God.
unless you're
However, I
thinking
can
of that
think of
of which nothing greater can be conceived, right?
which, that's like if you're able to think of the like think beyond thought is essentially in order to accomplish that you have to think beyond thought because if you're able to think it, God is still greater. That's why I was like the joke aspect of like what Anselm does here is infinity plus one. There's a saying at my work that I feel like is pretty apt here. Whatever you're thinking, you're not thinking big enough. So for Anselm, that is God. Like whatever that is, that's God. What the people who are trying to show the ridiculousness of that argument are doing is they're saying, all right, well, I'm going to take that, which you claim is the essence of a thing, and attribute it to a property as a property to something else. So to use the Apple example again, I'm talking about red. And I'm talking about pure redness, and then you're like, well, James, this doesn't make sense because I have here an apple that you claim should be able to be red, but it's green. So therefore, some of the things you're saying about redness don't make sense. But it's because you're taking that which is what I'm talking about as an essence of the thing and talking about it as a property of a thing. So because of that, you're no longer talking about the same thing. It would be the same, like if I'm talking about red and you're talking about apples, even though the apple might share redness, we're not talking about the same thing. So because of that's why the second common critique fails. Because, and again, this is all within the Aristotelian framework. And there's two ways that you can actually dismantle this argument and why I was able to finally sleep at night. The first and more insane way, and there are people who will argue that he did it, is out of. Now, people will say that Kant disproved or showed that existence is not a property, that it's not a predicate. I always felt like it was just an assertion, and so I'm looking into it and I'm, trying to figure it out. And what Kant does is he doesn't attack Anselm's argument directly. What he does is he completely dismantles and gets rid of the Aristotelian framework that the argument was made from and built an entirely new framework from scratch. So what that does is, and I love using geometry to explain what's going on here. So in Euclidean geometry, if you have two parallel lines, are they ever going to intersect?
Nope.
No. If you have non-Euclidean geometry and you have two perfectly straight lines, can they, and that start off parallel, is it possible for them to intersect?
I honestly have no idea. My maths ended with Euclid.
In Euclidean geometry, yes. The easiest example for those that are not familiar with it is our Earth is a non-Euclidean plane.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And if you go from one line from a pole to another line to a pole, you're going to get, even though that at certain parts they look parallel, they eventually intersect to a point. So because of that, it's not entirely fair to say that. So what happened here is Ansel made an argument in Euclidean geometry. Kant came along and was like, ha, world doesn't actually work according to Euclidean rules. It works according to non-Euclidean rules. So he makes a whole new structure. So does he disprove Anselm? Kind of, but not in a direct way. So people can be like, well, Anselm was operating within a flawed framework. But again, I don't feel like that makes it a bad argument, because if something works within the framework and the parameters that they started off with, like you wouldn't say that the argument for parallel lines in a Euclidean geometry is bad just because non-Euclidean exists. Is it correct? Probably not, but it doesn't make it bad.
Yeah. So is it almost like so Aristotle's physics talks about violent motion and natural motion. Modern physics has no such terms, right?
Concept, yeah.
Yeah. So like, was Aristotle wrong about there being two different kinds of motion? Like, sure,
Yeah.
but like it worked. Like all models are false. Some are useful. Aristotle's was useful. It was useful enough for people who had no concept of outer space and whose all of their maths really only had to do with the surface of the Earth. Like, yeah, Aristotle's maths were fine.
Yeah.
Is that kind of your point? Like,
yeah, it like, so like the point, yes, I agree 100% with what you're saying. The point that I'm getting at goes a little bit of a step beyond that, where the a lot of people will say, because we operate in a non-Euclidean framework, that means Anselm's argument is wrong. Or, I'm sorry, not wrong, is bad. And I'm like, no. It can be wrong, but still a good, beautiful argument. Going back to the point I made earlier, like you can see the flaws in the work of painting, in the technique, but it still be a beautiful painting.
Yeah, like you can look at Aristotle's physics and find the beauty in it, even though it's not gonna get you to the moon.
Right. And to be clear, he's so a distinction that needs to be made. Like, was Aristotle's physics flawed? Yes, because of the tools of his time and everything else, and it was also formed by his metaphysics, which was,
well, physics came before his metaphysics. So if anything, his metaphysics is informed by his physics, right?
Well, it had to do with not necessarily like formed as in like which came first as far as like what was written, but more of like the way that he would study the physical world was very armchair scientist.
Yeah.
Like he didn't go out and do the empirical scientific method as we understood it, because the way it was explained to me in college was you can't, like, the belief that a lot of ancient people had wasn't that there was this outside external force power that controlled the water, that controlled the earthquakes, or that controlled the land. No, 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 no. Your God was the earthquake. Your God was the sea, and Poseidon was just the personification of that. But Poseidon is the sea. Well, you don't want to put tests on your God. Like, you don't want to dissect your God. Just as an interesting aside, like the reason not that the scientific method didn't start off in other areas, but the reason why it flourished within Catholicism is because of that separation of, no, our God is separate from the created world. So now we can dissect the created world.
Yeah, I mean, Aristotle was kind of the same way too, because Aristotle didn't believe in the Greek gods. Aristotle was like almost an atheist of his day, almost. Well, maybe he was an atheist compared to the pagans around him. Is a good way for me to put it.
Yeah, he was. The joke like, "Oh, you're an atheist. You're an atheist like us. You just believe. We don't believe in one God."
Oh, like one fewer God or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I do know that Christians were called atheists before that word came to mean its modern usage. It was used like atheos or whatever in the Greek. Like Greek pagans would call Catholics like atheos, like they don't have gods. Like, what's wrong with them? So in a way, like you can kind of think about Aristotle and then subsequently the Christians as like the first atheists almost, which is kind of funny.
So Will actually is jumping a little bit of ahead. I just noticed in the chat, like, if whether we need to say that it's bad to say that it fails to accomplish what it claims to. Yes, you're absolutely correct that we don't need to say it's bad. However, unfortunately I see a lot of people saying it, which is what inspired the series of dismantling arguments for the existence of God. But the way that it actually fails, and the way that you can say that it's a bad argument, is the way that Aquinas points it out. And he shows how it fails even within the same framework that Anselm's trying to work within from. So for those that were here from the beginning when we started this part of the conversation, when I was defining God, I also included Anselm states that it is self-evident that God is that which nothing greater can be conceived. Well, if you watched my video on ichtheism, God's not self-evident. We don't know what God is. We can't know what God is. And in order for us to have that knowledge of God being self-evident, it's got to be as obvious as the law of non-contradiction. But he's not. Ergo, God is not self-evident. And since he's not self-evident, the argument completely falls apart before it even gets started.
Someone has a good question. So, I think this is a really interesting way to put it. Do you think that in some... So, I hear Christians sometimes levy this complaint against like modern day skeptics and atheists that they've disenchanted the world. You'll have... he's not Catholic, but Justin Brierley from what's the name of Justin Brierley's podcast? He's the English guy who does... he had a podcast where he would just like have conversations. Like he did Bart Ehrman versus someone else. He did Matt Dillahunty versus someone else. I forget the name of his podcast, but anyway.
Yeah, I've only recently started getting into like more modern speakers within the apologetic community, thanks to the Catholic Apologetics Discord, because I've been so focused on like the classical stuff. Because if you notice, like we're still having the same arguments that been talked about in the classical. So I wanted to like really get to know like what.
Yeah, we've got to stand on the shoulders of giants for sure.
Yeah.
My only point there was Justin Brierley will often say that like becoming Christian will re-enchant your world if you're not a Christian. Well, if you're like some kind of agnostic, atheist, whatever. And it almost seems like the ancient pagans might have been able to levy the same kind of criticism against the Catholics. Well, the Christians,
I can see that the way that it was explained to me. So this was like all around the time of Thomas Aquinas. Like people were still doing the armchair physics, as I call it. Um, the way that it was explained to me was the Greek philosophers had a great love for what they called necessary knowledge. And that would be things like the Pythagorean theorem, 2 plus 2 equals 4, truths that it was impossible for it to be something else. And so everything had to be a necessary truth in order for them to find value in it. So if something wasn't a necessary truth, they didn't care. So for example, one of the big complaints about Aristotle is, like he said, if you take a 10-pound rock and a 5-pound rock, the 10-pound rock is going to fall twice as fast. Well, that's armchair physics, because his thought process is it's necessary. It's got to be this way. And at that point, you still had within the Catholic community an almost love for that idea of thinking. Well, it started to get bad to the point that the church sent a bishop in 1277 to do an investigation and list out a group of things that are contrary to the Catholic faith within these classical philosophers. One of which was the idea that the world necessarily had to exist the way that it was. Like God could have freely chosen to create the world one way or another. Fun fact, a lot of Thomas Aquinas's arguments were put on that condemnation of 1277 because the bishop misunderstood Aquinas. But along with a bunch of other things, that was the big one. Was like, no, like the world isn't full of necessary knowledge because God has free will and is able to willfully choose how to create things. He could have created the world any number of ways, and we don't know, so it's on us to go and find out what. So, one, the removal of the creation with the creator, like with the divine, or I should say, the removal of the physical realm with the divine realm. Like there was that aspect. Could you call that a disenchantment? Sure. But there was still that sense of enchantment there of like, well, we don't know because God is so much greater than us. He could have done it any other way. So it's yes from the perspective of the Greeks, no from the idea of the modern scientist.
And just for whatever my opinion is worth, I actually don't think that this kind of like rationalist project is disenchanting at all.
No.
I am like so enchanted by modern physics and stuff like that, and I find like we currently think that there are these four forces at work in the universe. Electromagnetism, gravity, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force. Those are the four fundamental forces, and they're straight up magic, dude. Like we have no idea, like why is gravity equal to what big G, not local gravity? Yeah. Why is G? I don't know, man. It's magic, man. Like I don't know. Yeah. I find that to be very enchanting.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I don't agree with the idea that science disenchants, the world around us. Like the idea that if you know something, it loses wonder. I call it the magician's fallacy, where just because you know the secret behind the magic trick, the idea is like if you know the secret behind the magic trick, you've lost the wonder of the magic trick. I don't think that's true for the world itself. Like there's more wonder behind there because every time, like I shouldn't say every time. Every now and then, I'm about to sit in a chair and I'm like, it's kind of fascinating that all these little atoms that make up me have such a strong force that they don't want to fall through the gaps of that chair. That's what enables me to sit. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, I'm on the same page. Sometimes I think about the fact that we're all literally made of stardust, and I'm like, I'm just, I'm shocked at the fact that, so many of the atoms in our bodies were born in the hearts of dying stars, trillions of years ago, and they were flung across the universe, and they landed up on Earth, and then eventually they wound up in that burger that I ate last week, and now it's part of me. Like, that's crazy.
Yes, So the whole idea of like no, like that's why I said like I call it the magician's fallacy, because it comes from, I feel like, that area of thinking, maybe not directly but at least indirectly. um and it's a name of my own making. If there's an official name for it, please let me know, but I think magician's fallacy is
Yeah.
appropriate.
Yeah, I think that works. Yeah. Yeah, I'm thoroughly enchanted by our
Yeah.
universe. Um, Deterministic as it is, I don't
Yeah.
find the fact that the laws of nature appear to be constant. I don't think
Hmm.
that's not disenchanting to me. I'm in
Yeah.
constant awe of our universe.
I
Um,
do want to touch on something Will said about like, um even if Anselm was correct,
oops,
we can't conclude that there's only one deity.
there it
There's
is.
only one that which nothing greater can be conceived. Um, this gets into the again, using Aristotelian metaphysics, the categories. If you only have that which nothing greater can be conceived, and there's no differentiating other factors, because now it's that plus something else. Well, if you only have that aspect and you have a second thing that's that exact same aspect, but there's no other differentiating categories, it um it doesn't, according to Aristotle, it's one and the same thing. So let me put it to you like this. If I said, hey, there's two Jameses, but he is sitting at this exact both are sitting at this exact coordinates, both are like, and going through all 10 categories, and all of them are 1-to-1 equal, then I'm not talking about two different things, I'm talking about one and the same thing. So that's like, indirectly you're able to get to one, but one flaw that almost every single argument makes, and I hate it when theists do this, no singular argument for the existence of God can prove the existence of a particular religious God. And so many theists try to make that jump. Unjustly so. Like, for those that saw the conversation Kevin and I had on why I'm Catholic, I don't know about you, Kevin. That was a lot of steps that I had to go through to get from, all right, so there exists God. All right, now I got to do this step, 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 just to get to Christianity. And then there were still a few more steps to get to Catholicism. And even then, I had to say, and at the end of the day, I know that it's not a solid, airtight, irrefutable argument for Catholicism, but at least it's reasonable. So that is a distinction a lot of people fail to make about arguments for God, I feel like, is even if they do succeed in proving or showing that a God, it's never going to prove or show a particular religion as correct.
And just out of curiosity, I think I know the
Mm-hmm.
answer, but um, you didn't arrive at God because of the process that you laid out, or Catholicism for that matter, because of the process that you laid out in that video that we just referenced, number 4 that we did together or whatever,
Yeah,
right?
3.
3.
4 was why you were no longer Catholic.
Oh, okay.
3 was why I was Catholic.
Um, but that's not the reason, right? It's that more post, like kind maybe the reason for
It's
continuance, but not the region
Yeah.
for
So the
origination.
reason why I am Catholic is because I'm a cradle Catholic. Like, if we're to say like the reason why um I became Catholic, like, to me there's a difference between why I am Catholic and why I became Catholic. The reason why I became Catholic, yes, I'm a cradle Catholic.
Yeah.
The reason why I am Catholic is those reasons, because yes, it is the reason why I continue to
Yeah.
be Catholic. So that's why the title of it is always like why I am Catholic. It's not why I became Catholic,
Right.
because there is a distinction. Um, unfortunately, a lot of people see why I am to mean why I became, but there's a reason why I picked that particular word. Um, because yeah, I became Catholic because I was born into it, baptized as an infant.
Same.
Um, Interestingly enough, I was actually confirmed under the Byzantine rite
Oh, that is interesting.
when I was 3 years old. Because yeah, so long story short, and you're getting some James lore here. We lived in California at the time. The bishop of the area of the diocese we were in was doing and saying a lot of things that my mom felt was very against what Pope John Paul II was saying, and was concerned about the spiritual health of me and my siblings as we were growing up within that diocese because of that particular bishop. She happened to hear from her friend, "Hey, I'm having my kids baptized by this retired Byzantine bishop. Do you want to come?" Because at that point, my second brother was born, and she was getting ready for him to be baptized. So she was like, "Yeah, absolutely." So we all went out. He baptized and confirmed my, at the time, youngest brother, and said, "Oh, I see you got two other kids there. You want me to go ahead and confirm them as well?"
So you didn't have a sponsor. You didn't have any kind of like
My
class and
mom,
prep.
like no,
That's
yeah,
really funny.
I was confirmed under the Byzantine rite. I still received First Communion under the Roman rite, and I was baptized in the Roman rite, but I was confirmed in the Byzantine rite.
That's very funny. Uh, I I often try to like my real Catholic creds, like my
Hmm.
trad creds, are that I was confirmed when I was 10. And I feel like
Yeah,
that's early. Like I feel like a lot of the Novus Ordo Catholics are confirmed more at like 14, 15, 16. But I was
I've
10.
seen some. I've seen some 12-year-olds now, but
Okay.
yeah, 10 is still a little bit early. But they're starting to do like the preteen.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think I was confirmed. So I was born in late '95. So I think I was confirmed in
mhm.
early '96. 2006. Sorry.
Baptized. Oh, 2006.
Confirmed.
Yeah.
I think I was confirmed in 2006. Um, and like I feel like in 2006, nobody was getting confirmed at even 12. People were getting confirmed
Yeah.
at like 16 and stuff like that. But I
Oh
got
yeah.
confirmed
Like
at 10. And here I thought I was like, the real deal. And then you come along, you're like, no, I was 3. You win, you win. All right.
but honestly, and that's where I attribute a lot of my uh my gift of understanding from, because as you know, one of the gifts of the Holy Spirit at confirmation is the gift of wisdom.
Hey,
Having it at 3 years old helps out a lot.
I bet. Yeah, you've got, all those extra years on me being wise. I've only been this wise since I was 10. You've been this wise since you were 3.
No, I mean, there is a real like wisdom, no pun intended, in the Byzantine and that tradition of having the confirmation at that young. But there's also, I can understand the Latin rite on doing it later. But I am always very appreciative of that fact, because I really do attribute my gift and charism for the faith because of that aspect.
This is totally random, but one of my favorite stories of my youth comes from uh, a confirmation class that we were having before we were
Hmm.
all confirmed. Um, and one of my classmates was just like he didn't hear things all the time.
Yeah.
Um, and so he must have misheard the question, because the question, Father was lobbing a softball question to us. How
Yeah.
many people are there in the Trinity? Should be an easy one, right? And so he
Yeah.
calls on my one classmate who, again, his hearing was probably just not very good. Um, so he totally misheard the question. I don't know what he heard, but without skipping a beat, how many people are in the Holy Trinity? A lot. And everyone started cracking up. We were like, dude, no, the answer is 3. And he was like, wait,
it
what was the
it
question?
it feels like the reverse of that SpongeBob meme where they're in the warehouse with all the mattresses, and it's like, how many are there? At least 4.
Yeah,
Whoa.
yeah, yeah. Yep. Very similar, yeah. So I love that story. I think it's hilarious. I don't know, I don't know why I find it so funny, and I still remember it after all
Yeah.
these years. But how many people?
No,
So sometimes I'll still answer. How many people are in the Trinity? A lot.
in the words of my brother, look, the only person that I need to make laugh is myself.
Hey, there you go.
So actually, speaking of funny situations, something I always find funny, because of our schedules, we usually plan these appearances about a month out in advance. And then for some reason, the week leading up to the appearance,
Something happens.
something happens relevant to the topic. And I went on to Debate an Atheist and Ask an Atheist, both for the just on the Ask Atheist threads, essentially, and just said, hey, what are some of the worst arguments that you've ever heard for the existence of God? To get more material for the series. And one of the people there made a comment about, like, oh, well, Aquinas has zero evidence for the existence of God. By the way, I am going to be addressing the 5 ways in I think that's going to be the next video in the series. Maybe not the next video I put up, but next video in the series is 5 ways. But he was like, oh, well, Aquinas had no evidence for the existence of God. And I'm like, well, his first way, like when you actually understand it, is all about change. Are you saying change doesn't happen? And, he tried to dig himself out of the hole. And I said, no, like the stuff that you're pointing at isn't isn't a thing not changing. It's how we measure the thing changing. Like he was like, well, the path of the planets doesn't change. I wasn't about to get into like how it's going to take like billions and billions of years for us to be in the exact same spatial, and with the expansion of the universe, like I don't even know if that's possible. But even if the path of the planets around the sun was perfectly the same and unchanging, it's a measurement of the change of the position of the planets in relation to the sun. And he got really butthurt about it. So he started spamming all of my comments until eventually I was like, look, I've told you, like, I'm not going to engage with you on this until you acknowledge that, yes, you made a mistake. Like, it's fine. Like, I agree that Aquinas didn't prove God, but to say he had no evidence is a step too far. But he wouldn't let up on wanting me to prove transubstantiation. And I'm like, you know what? I'm about to have a conversation with Kevin about bad arguments, and I've expressed to him that, like, I agree using miracles to prove God is a bad way to argue for God. And he's also one of the most informed people that I know on Eucharistic miracles and why they're not convincing. I wonder what would convince Kevin of either a Eucharistic miracle actually taking place or that transubstantiation takes place. It was like, he's anomalous. He doesn't believe in substance at all anyway, so that's a high hurdle. And if you don't know the answer to that, Kevin, that's fine, because that actually leads to into my point of why miracles are a bad argument.
Yeah. So first, I just want to comment briefly on the whole Reddit thing too. It's first, that's why I don't hang out in those subreddits, like atheism and all that. I don't. Anyway, but then also I just find the whole like no evidence thing to be such an odd like hill to die on, because having evidence is such like a low bar. Like,
yeah,
and so, I could very easily. I live in Kentucky, like right at the base of Appalachia. There's a lot of like kind of speaking in tongue type churches around here. Mm-hmm. I could like walk into any one of those churches, and be like, "Hey guys, like, why are you speaking in tongues?" They'd be like, "Well, God has like convicted me," and I'd be like, "Oh, okay, there's some evidence. God has convicted. Is it great evidence? No, probably not. But is it evidence? Yeah, I mean, it's got to be evidence, right? So just having evidence at all, to me, seems like such a low bar to clear that it just seems like such a weird hill to die on for somebody to want to claim that there's no evidence at all for almost anything. Like there's evidence
Yeah.
of Bigfoot, and there's evidence of aliens, and there's evidence of the Loch Ness monster. You know, like again,
I worked with someone who is convinced that there's evidence for dinosaurs. One of it being that, or not dinosaurs, evidence for dragons. Um, one of it was dinosaur bones, which is where the Freudian slip came in. But the biggest one was if you look at the way that dragons are described across cultures, it's almost universally the same. And so it's like because of that universal
hey, sure,
similarity, like yeah, like that's so like when you get to like there's evidence for almost anything. Yes, there's technically evidence for dragons as well. Great evidence?
no,
No.
no,
But there is evidence.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, again, just a weird hill to die on. But then there was two questions. What would convince? Well, I guess kind of three. What would convince Kevin of Eucharistic miracles? What would convince Kevin of
Or
transubstantiation?
what would to better phrase it, what would a Eucharistic miracle need to have to be convincing for you? And or what would convince you of transubstantiation?
Yeah. So I think that there's one really simple thing that would convince me, but then I'll kind of lay out the way that I think that all of these miracles should go. And that would just be DNA. Like if we found and were able to replicate human DNA, and all the DNA across all these different Eucharistic miracles was the same. So maybe the first one I wouldn't be convinced by, because the first one I'd be like, well, okay, it's DNA, and
some random guy's DNA. We don't know,
and maybe it's even like Palestinian DNA or
Yeah.
something. Okay, fine. So they swabbed some random Palestinian guy and they put that in there. I'm not convinced. But then the second one happens on the other side of the world, right? Right? Like the first one happens in Brazil and the second one happens in Poland. And now I'm like, wow, that guy can travel.
Yeah.
And it's 10 years later, right?
Yeah, like let's do 50 or 100 years later.
Yeah. And they keep on happening across time, and the DNA is the same. And it's like some Palestinian man's DNA. I'd be like,
Yeah.
At that point, I think I'd be like, okay, this is undeniable.
Yeah.
And that's even without everything else that I'm about to talk about. But I think, and this is something that Dr. Kelly Kieris talks about a lot. He's the guy who published those two papers in late 2024 about Eucharistic miracles. This guy is Catholic. He's a Eucharistic minister. He talks about the importance of having a defined protocol, which, I mean, I work in pharma, but the protocol governs everything. But there should be some kind of protocol for what happens when there's a Eucharistic miracle. And that protocol really needs to have things that will, number one, ensure that blinding is happening. So what needs to happen is we need to take a sample from the suspected miracle. Then we need to take samples from Eucharistic, hosts that are inoculated with that fungus that turns red. And we need to grab samples of actual human heart tissue. And then we need to submit all of them to the same lab, unlabeled, obviously, and then we just have the same tests run on all of them. And then when there'll be one unblinded person, and the unblinded person will then be able to take a look at the lab's results and then be able to, this one is this one and this one, and then we can compare. And does the actual, so that would go a long way too. And we've never done that for a single Eucharistic miracle, not a single time.
So what you're saying is basically people who are claiming, hey, we've had scientific testing done on Eucharistic miracles need to shut up until an actual scientific test is done on Eucharistic miracles.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound like Dr. Linoli in the 70s did actual scientific tests. He did. But he knew what he was looking at the whole time. And there were no...
And that's not proper scientific
correct
testing as I understand it.
Exactly. There should, and granted, the Lanciano host is different because it's an ancient relic, so it's like not like you might be able to tell, right off the bat which one is which, like actual fresh human heart tissue and stuff. But we could do this, like we could like grab human heart tissue and like petrify it, and sure that would take a year or whatever, but we could petrify it and then submit that one. You know what I mean? Like there's things that we could do, and we've never done them for a single Eucharistic miracle. So that would be a great step in the right direction. But my answer is still going to be the DNA thing. I think that the DNA thing
Yeah.
would be like undeniable.
Everything I've heard from you as far as like why you struggle accepting Eucharistic miracles is that lack of DNA. So that's I'm not too surprised because like you're like, well, everything can be explained either by it actually being human or by this naturally occurring things. If we had the DNA, then it would be definitive one way or the other.
Exactly.
So no, that makes sense on that. Before you go on um, the transubstantiation aspect, I do want to touch on Quaesines as far as because that might help the audience understand like what we mean when we're talking about transubstantiation. Like the real presence versus transubstantiation. The way that I've understood it is so the real presence is Christ is physically there, he is present in it. And so for like the Lutheran, if I'm understanding the position correctly, the Lutheran would say, all right, so this piece of bread is God. Christ is present in this bread, but the bread is still there. Like it's bread and Jesus. Transubstantiation is two aspects. It is the process by which the bread turns into the real presence and is no longer bread because the substance, what it is, changes. Now, the Catholic Church does say that it keeps the accidental properties of bread, which when you get into the Aristotelian accidental and what's an accident and what's an essence of a thing, it gets real muggy when you get down to the nitty gritty of it. Like we talked about, well, a human being is this, and this. Well, what if somehow someone removed all the hair follicles off a human, or someone was born with a genetic mutation where they were completely hairless? Does that mean that they're no longer a mammal and therefore no longer human? Someone would rightly respond, well, no, they're still human because of the DNA and XYZ. Well, if we uploaded someone's brain and memories into a computer where they're no longer a mammal, are they still human? Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Like you get into some weird things as far as like what actually is the essence of a thing and what the accident of a thing is. So that's why the Catholic Church still using the Aristotelian language. And by the way, for those that would like more on transubstantiation, check out Kevin's interview with Jimmy Akin, where he talks about nominalism and the real presence in transubstantiation. Great interview. Good job, Kevin.
Well, thank you.
But the aspect there is transubstantiation is what I like to call the when the process of the bread changing into the real presence, and the real presence is what happens after the transubstantiation. Real presence is the noun, transubstantiation is the verb, to kind of put it in simple terms.
That was great. Thank you. And then I think I still owe you my response on it, because I think you kind of asked me what would I want to see in order to, believe in transubstantiation. But then I can also kind of answer the question about the real presence more broadly, although that's going to be harder.
Yeah. Yes.
But so I think first I would need to become convinced that substances are like they have like a real ontology, like that they actually like that Aristotle was right. And I'm not entirely
or even Aquinas, who wasn't quite Aristotelian.
Yeah. And that's like a tall order, because it seems like most of the people who do think that transubstantiation is true would also tell you that there is no way to scientifically verify that substances exist or anything like that. So I'm not sure how we could do that. But let's say that we came to the let's say that these realists developed some kind of empirical method of demonstrating that substances really exist. Fantastic. Great. That's a great start. Now I know that it's at least possible. But from my vantage point, transubstantiation isn't only not true, but it's actually not possible. Because if substances don't exist, then right. Okay. So once we confirm that substances do exist, Now we would have to go about the task of actually being able to measure the substance both before and after transubstantiation, and then being able to tell
Hmm.
that it changed. And again,
Yeah.
I'm not sure how we would do that, but in this fantasy land where we've developed some
Yeah.
kind of empirical method, theoretically we'd be able to run that test. Look under the
If we were able to have an empirical method of measuring substances, which we've already established is really hard to do because it's within like at least for Aristotle, like like he might argue that it could be empirically verified, but even he was like kind of iffy on like what exactly the substance was. And Thomas Aquinas kind of solved it where with the moderate realism position where it's the substance is the abstraction that the mind makes. It's still there and real, but we interact with it through the abstraction of the mind. There's no way to interact with it empirically. Um, but if we did find a way to interact with it empirically, then yeah, absolutely, we should be able to also empirically interact with any Eucharist before and after the Mass and determine what the actual substance of it is, because now we're no longer blinded by the illusion of appearances, as Kant would put it.
yeah, yeah. Um, and then with regards to like the real presence, this might be like the trad in me who like doesn't even understand what the real presence is supposed to mean. Um, Daniel asks a good question about transfinalization and transsignification,
I haven't
because
heard those terms before, so I don't think I'd be able to provide a good answer
he
on
and I
it.
have talked about this before, and I'm gonna be honest and say that I don't recall enough to actually like explicate on either of these. Um, but uh, to me, the real presence, and this might be like a little bit, and I want you to call me out if you think that I'm being uncharitable here, but I think that the real presence in some ways is like a punt where Catholics might be saying like, yeah, look, we're not. The real presence is Jesus is there somehow. We don't know how. We have no idea. Like, but
Mhm.
he's there.
Yeah.
That's what the real presence is. And then transubstantiation is like, oh no, we do know how. It's actually the substances, right? The accidents remain the same, but the substances. So it's like the transubstantiation is kind of
Mhm.
like it's an answer to the question of the real
Yeah.
presence. I just don't find it to be a good one, but it's at least
I,
an answer.
I would say it's closer to like something that Plato said in Plato's Republic, where he's talking about the forms in the cave, and this is where we get like the Platonic forms, where he says, "I don't know how it is the case, but I know it must be something like this." And exactly as Cassines is saying, like transubstantiation is the fitting term to be used here because while it doesn't explain the mystery, it's that we don't know. Like, if it was bread before and now it is Jesus, then something happened to the substance between before and after, and we call whatever that process is transubstantiation because the substance is changing. How and why?
Yeah. But the real presence is even like a step back from that. The real presence is not committing anybody to the existence of substances. The real presence is like,
Mhm.
kind of even broader.
Yeah, yeah. It's if I remember the interview correctly, it's where Jimmy was saying that like that's where anomalous can come in and accept the Eucharist, the real presence within the Eucharist. Um, the anomalous can't critique transubstantiation and say that it's a bad terminology, but they don't have to use it or follow it within their own understanding of the mystery of the Eucharist.
Yeah.
Um, Not gonna lie, that was basically the answer I was kind of expecting from you, because it does lead
Predictable.
into, well, it more so of like you're an honest individual, and an honest person would have answered it in a very similar uh, capacity, and the reason being is to demand proof of transubstantiation or the real presence in order to be convinced that God exists is almost like saying, show me Bigfoot before I accept that the footprint is Bigfoot.
Yeah, it's like backwards.
It's backwards.
Yeah.
I mentioned to you before we did this that like my view of miracles is people always want to try to, or a lot of people want to try to use miracles to prove God. But if God doesn't exist, then any explanation for miracles that have a natural explanation is always going to be better. And because the way that I understand how God and miracles work, there's always going to be a natural, um, explanation for a miracle. So a miracle can't come about unless there is a God to bring that miracle. But if there is no God, then the event is just monkeys typing on a keyboard, eventually figuring out how to write Shakespeare. It's eventually going to turn out that way, one way or another, just because of age, size, and aspect of the universe.
Yeah. I'm asking no one someone what embodied objects means here. I wonder if it means something like in the first century ancient Near East, the idea of like animism or something like that, like wasn't foreign. I'm not sure. We'll see if he answers. But I've got a question for you, James, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Do you consider yourself somebody who believes in like transubstantiation, or
yes?
Okay.
But it's because I believe God first, and then because there is a God that could bring that about, and a little bit like what David said. I'm not sure if I agree exactly with the way he phrased it, but I agree at least the idea behind it. It is more about what God determines / declares it to be. Because this is how I understand like miracles and the way that God works is if God is the ultimate foundation, unchanging source of all that exists, when he declared, let there be light, he was also declaring all of the laws of physics that govern all of reality at the same time. And he continues to do so to this day. So if he was to break or do something counter to those laws of physics, he is now contradicting himself, which he cannot do.
Oh, interesting. Do you think that God never breaks the laws of physics?
I actually do.
Interesting.
Yeah. So any and all miracles will have a physical explanation to them. One of my favorite like ways to kind of help elaborate this idea is the miracle of the wedding at Cana, where he turns the water to wine. Now, I'm sure you've heard the phrase of like God exists outside of space and time.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm understanding like one-dimensional beings, two-dimensional beings, three-dimensional beings, four-dimensional beings, five-dimensional beings correctly, then it's either so if I remember correctly, we are three-dimensional beings on a four-dimensional plane of existence. Is that accurate? Or am I missing? Because I know we exist on the three-dimensional plane of physicality, with the fourth dimension being time, but because we're third-dimensional beings, we can only move in one direction on the time axis, is how I understand it.
These are just like models of how we can think about things. It's not like there
Yeah.
actually are like these dimensions and stuff. But
yeah,
that's how we can talk about
so
things.
The reason why I bring that up is conceptually, if there was a four-dimensional being, it would be able to move forward and backwards on that time axis the same way that we move through space. There's also a video done by the Action Labs where it was showing, hey, here's what a four-dimensional sphere would look like as it moves through our space. And in our perspective, it would just be nothing, and then slowly getting bigger, reaches maximum, and then it shrinks back into nothingness. Now, it's not that the sphere is being created from our perspective, it would look like it, but it's just moving through our space-time in a different axis that is foreign to us. So what does this have to do with the wedding at Cana? So if God exists outside of space and time, I believe that means that he would be able to interact with time in a way that is foreign to us, where he's not bound to move only in the one direction like we are. If B theory of time is correct, which I personally think it is, then God exists outside of it and sees all of it happening simultaneously and is able to interact with the past at the same time as he's interacting with our present, as he's interacting with our future.
I mean, is God interacting, like God interacting with the universe,
Mm-hmm.
if the laws of nature are not breaking, is undetectable, right? Like, God is almost,
Yes.
from our perspective, God
It,
is
like,
not interacting with the universe if the laws of nature are never breaking, right?
yeah. So, like, what I was getting at, like with the wedding at Cana, is two aspects. One, you've heard the factoid that because of the way the water cycle works, you're drinking dinosaur pee right now.
What? I don't know if I have heard this.
So, because of the way that the water cycle works, billions and billions and billions of years ago, a dinosaur drank some water, peed it out. It then evaporated, got absorbed in the plants or whatever, and eventually that water got recycled.
Sure, it's almost certainly every single one of us has at least one dihydrogen monoxide molecule in our bodies that at one time was excreted in the stream of urine of a dinosaur. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
just like it is a statistical certainty that with every breath that we take, we breathe in at least one atom of air that
Mm-hmm.
that was also breathed in by George Washington or
Yeah.
Jesus Christ or pick whoever.
Yeah.
It's just the sheer number of atoms that are in
Mm-hmm.
each breath that we take is so staggering that
Yep. So, with that in mind, that also means that at some point that water that Jesus had the servants collect, either in the past or in the future, would have become fermented wine by being absorbed by grapes and turning into wine. So when Jesus turned the water into wine, what he did was he took the water as a being that could interact with time in a way that is foreign to us, but while not breaking the laws of physics, moved that water's temporal state in a way that was possible to him but not possible for us into a state where it was now wine.
that sounds like it's the laws of physics breaking to me.
I mean, it looks like it, but as I understand it, like, again, and this is and that's why it's like miracles can't prove the existence of God, because in order for that to be true, like you said, like, oh, like the dimension, like the fourth dimension doesn't actually exist. It's just a way of thinking about things. Like there isn't a four-dimensional. It's not, when we talk about the different dimensions of space-time, we're not saying that there must exist a fifth dimension, or there must exist a four-dimensional being, or anything like that. And yes, I absolutely agree. So the only way for my theory to work is if such a being did exist, because such a being would be able to interact with the laws of physics in that way, because that's how the laws of physics can be interacted with by that being, not by us. So if one of us were to try to do it, we would be breaking the laws of physics because we can't move through time like that. But that being could, just like you having a three-dimensional sphere breaks the laws of physics for the two-dimensional being.
To be clear, there are no laws of physics for two-dimensional beings versus three-dimensional. The dimensions are just like ways that we can talk about the physical universe. So like just I feel like sometimes like the pop sci kind of stuff, like all these different dimensions, and it's kind of
Yeah,
like, well, that's not like
yeah.
really.
So to then be more clear, just like you having a sphere to a being that exists only on the two-dimensional plane of existence, I know such a thing doesn't exist, just in a way of thinking about the way of reality and space-time. If you were to take that sphere and interact with it, that being would feel like its laws are being broken,
So
even though they're not.
what you're saying
It's
is
just,
like um, there are laws of nature that we might not understand yet.
yeah,
And so if we think that a miracle, quote unquote, is breaking a law of nature, we've simply misunderstood the laws of nature. Is that pretty much what you're saying?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I'll tell you what I thought you were saying at first, and it's clear to me that this is not what you were saying. But I thought that what you were saying was something like this. Yeah, the wedding feast at Cana, what actually happened was that they had actually like misplaced their wine. They didn't realize it was really wine the whole time. They just
Yeah.
didn't realize it. Or like, yeah, there was some kind of crazy chemical reaction where they accidentally spilled some grapes into it, and then there was this yeast that they accidentally spilled. I thought that you were saying that there's going to be a totally natural explanation for all of these miracles,
Mhm.
and like it's just that God ordained the way that the universe would operate. So these crazy coincidences might happen at certain times, each one of which has a natural explanation.
Yes.
That's what I thought that you might be saying it. But it's clear to me that's not what you were saying. So
Yeah. No, it's what makes it a miracle, to answer Jerry's question, is like, well, then it's not a miracle, is it? What makes it a miracle, and this is the best explanation that I've heard. We have scientifically explained the 10 plagues of Egypt, right? Like, even if we accept that the 10 plagues did happen, we have a way of scientifically explaining how each miracle happened, that the water turned to blood because of this. Well, when that happened, the frogs had to get out of there. That's why they got infested with the frogs. And when they killed the frogs, that stopped the flies from getting eaten. So that's why they got infested with the flies. And then a volcanic eruption happened far, far away, which caused the locusts to come in to avoid the smoke and everything. And like, we have a scientific explanation for everything. This is what the miracle was, though. It started when Moses said it would start and stopped when Moses said it would stop. If the stories are to be believed.
right.
So the miracle is that God is in control there, as opposed to it just happening. It's why within the Catholic language we say the miracle of childbirth, because God had a hand in there with the infusing of the soul. So same thing for the Eucharist. That's why we say the transubstantiation, what happens at the Mass, is a miracle, because God has a hand in it. It happens daily for Catholics, but just because it happens daily doesn't make it less of a miracle. What makes it a miracle is God is directly in control of it, and it happens because he decreed it to happen. Which goes back to that statement you and I were saying, just knowing about it doesn't remove the wonder from it. So me knowing or having this idea on the wedding at Cana happening this particular way, or knowing that there's some rule that allows it to be possible within the laws of physics that we might not know about, that doesn't diminish it being a miracle from me. It's like, oh my gosh, isn't that amazing that our God has that ability to do that?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that.
I wanted to pull up Daniel's a comment saying that James is doing
Yeah.
amazing today, and that he leans towards something like panentheism and panpsychism. I'll be interested to see if kind of the broader Christian world eventually starts going in that direction. You see it in some of the kind of the more cutting edge philosophers like Philip Goff and all that. But he was a panpsychist before, he went panpsychism to Christianity instead of Christianity to panpsychism. But the whole panpsychist route does seem to solve a decent amount of issues. And so I'll just be interested to see if right now, what percent of people are panpsychists? A fraction of a percent. I'll be interested to see if this, grows over time.
Yeah.
I don't know if it will or if it won't. I'm interested to, I'm interested in seeing what happens.
Now, I know one of the biggest things that you had lamented to me on was no one wanted to get on your show to debate Marian apparitions because it was like, oh, it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, well, if it doesn't matter, then why do people say this is why I'm Catholic, or why do they use this as a reason why people should be Catholic?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, you know what? Fair enough. Using Marian apparitions or Eucharistic miracles to explain why someone else should not be Catholic is putting the cart before the horse. I'll be one of the first to admit that. I had a very long conversation with someone about the Miracle of the Sun. I know, like, the Miracle of the Sun is like one of the favorites because there were people who claimed to be agnostic or skeptics of the whole thing that then came out saying, oh, we saw this miracle happen, and according to testimonies, converted. I know that people debate the testimony, the legitimacy of those claims and things like that. But when I had this conversation, unfortunately, the guy that had the recording on his of that interview is no longer on YouTube and deleted the whole channel, and so that recording's been lost forever, unfortunately. But I asked the atheist, to me it doesn't, or I told the atheist, to me it doesn't matter whether there is a natural explanation for the dancing sun. What's interesting and fascinating and amazing to me is you had 3 children. I think the oldest was 12 or 13 at the time. From a very poor village, shepherd, with little to no education whatsoever, that were able to predict a weather phenomena that we don't know what that phenomena is or have been able to see a replication. I know people will talk about, like, oh, looking up and they had the illusion or something.
They didn't actually predict any weather phenomena, just to be clear.
Yeah, like, but that a miracle would take place on that day.
Yeah, there would be a sign that proves that Our Lady was really appearing to Lucia.
Yeah.
A sign. Lucia, my 2 cents is that Lucia thought that the soldiers returning would be the sign, because apparently, even as people were screaming about the sun, Lucia was like, guys, the soldiers are coming home. The soldiers are coming home. And obviously they never did. But
Yeah.
I think that Lucia thought that the soldiers returning would be the sign. That's the way it appears to me.
Which to me still leads credence to it. It like in a and the reason why I say that is because they predicted a sign would take place. They didn't know what it was. And then some strange weather phenomena took place. And the way that I understand the events that took place, the psychological explanations that are often used to try to explain what happened, that it was all like an illusion or a shared hallucination, doesn't match with the science as I understand. Now, again, I'm not a scientist and I'm not a psychologist, so there might be something out there that I've missed. But everything that I've read on the subject says that to claim mass hallucination or shared hallucination is just as crazy as to claim that the sun danced in the sky.
Yeah.
Now, I know that there's mass hysteria, but that's a different can of worms. And the phenomena of mass hysteria didn't quite fit with what happened at Fatima. So to me, the miracle isn't that the sun danced or that there was some kind of weather phenomena that made it look as if the sun danced. There's 2 aspects that make that an intriguing event to me. A sign was declared that would happen on that day, and nothing similar has happened since.
There actually have been similar events.
Really?
Just like 10 or 20 years ago in, I think, Georgia in the United States. there was this Catholic mystic who said the sun was going to, Our Lady appeared to her and told her the sun was going to dance. Sure
Yeah.
enough, a whole bunch of people gathered and they told everyone the sun had danced.
Yeah.
Ob-
Okay.
ob- Obviously, the sun only danced for them.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, a bunch of them were experiencing signs of solar damage to their retinas and stuff after the event. But yeah, I want to say that this happened. Like for some reason, the year 2008 is coming to the top of my brain. But yeah, there's been a couple repeats since then. Yeah,
but not predicted by the experts in the field, the ones that should be able to predict such an event.
there was a seer, some woman in Georgia, who said that Our Lady appeared to her and said that the sun will dance on this date in like 2008
Well,
or whatever.
when I say experts, I'm talking about like meteorologists,
Oh,
people
yeah,
that
correct.
would
Yeah.
know about weather phenomena. They don't know what would explain this weather phenomena. However, I'm willing to accept. Like I know that there's been theories, but a lot of it is like rings around the sun. But nothing that would explain like why the sun would appear to dance. I, with my view, is going and willing to acknowledge that there is a weather phenomena that will explain why the sun looks like it danced. I am perfectly okay with that. What I find interesting is between the two of us, the two situations where such a phenomena has been predicted have been by people that don't have that expertise to be able to make such a prediction. And one of them apparently didn't even think that it was going to be the dancing sun. It was soldiers, something more and more mundane of soldiers coming home. And then this crazy event happened on the day that she said a sign would occur. And she, even though she was wrong about the sign, something even more insane happened. While I will acknowledge that that is not enough to convince someone that God exists, it gives me as a believer something to pause and consider. And then you got something you pulled up?
Just that I was wrong about the year. It was 1992, not 2008. So I don't know where I got 2008 from.
So a year before I was born. 1992, you said?
Yeah. And hold on, I pulled up an article that I'm trying to. Let me control F in here and look up. So here's a few different ones. It looks like there were sun miracles in Lubbock, Texas, in 1989. Oh, sorry, hold on. In Denver in 1992, in Conyers, Georgia, in the mid 1990s. I wonder when that was. Oh, and then in a town that I can't pronounce in India in 2008. Yeah, so there's been like a decent number of sun miracles over the years. Now, obviously, they're all like copycats of Fatima, right? It's all like Our Lady's appearing to somebody, and she's like, "Oh, on this date, we're all gonna stare directly at the sun, and then, oh, lo and behold, the sun's gonna change colors." And
yeah, and the thing, and I mentioned this in when you had made your post about like, well, look at that, the church came out and declared that this one claimed miracle actually wasn't a miracle. And I pointed out like, and that's why my position is whenever I hear someone, so like these sun miracles that you're talking about, I'm like, I'll wait until the church has said it's okay to believe in it. That's when I'll start looking into it to see what I think. And I think the other reason that people use these miracles as proof that one should be Catholic is because they misunderstand the process that the church uses to declare something as a miracle. They think that when the church says, all right, the story of Fatima happened, you guys believe in the miracle of Fatima, believe that the sun danced, and believe that Mary appeared to the three children. That's not what she does technically. I know the language can sound very similar, but if you read the language very closely, what she's actually doing is saying, we have looked into the events of these individuals. What they have said, done, and command's not the right word, but what they advise the church community to do is not contrary to the faith. So if you wish to have a devotion to their way of living, you have our blessing to do so. Which is less of a confirmation that something miraculous took place. I know it's a little bit different for like some of the miracle aspects where it's like, but again, it's still very much a, hey, we've looked into it. This seems legit. So if you want to have a devotion or a reverence to it, you're more than welcome to. In fact, while the Vatican has priests devoted to the Shroud of Turin, she's never come out to declare it to any official capacity that it's
And this
um
bothers me a lot, if I'm being honest. Like, there is a uh, pontifical academy, or they have a term for it, but the Vatican, like the Vatican,
Mhm.
one of the universities in the Vatican,
Yeah.
offers like a course. It's like a couple $100. I want to say it's like €300 or €400, um, and you can go get a certificate in shroud studies from
Mhm.
some university in the Vatican. You take 3 or 4 classes on it over the course of a year, then you get your little certificate. It's meaningless.
Yeah.
It's a you know it's a mill, right? It's a
Yeah.
but about the shroud, and they're teaching you that the shroud is real. Like the guy, one of the guys who teaches one of the classes was on Pints with Aquinas. Forgot the priest's
Mhm.
name at this time.
Actually, funny story. I just recently found out that the guy that owns the agency that I work at knows the priest.
Weird, small world. Um,
Yes.
but then it annoys me. So the Catholic Church is perfectly happy to take your money for a shroud, but we're not going to actually commit to whether or not it's. Come on, just commit to it or don't. But don't do this. Don't do this. Yeah, we'll take your money, but we're not going to
to,
say it's
to
real.
to play devil's advocate here, the way that it could be doing is like, hey, so even though the church hasn't made an official declaration because they're still in the study process of it, and because like as you point out, there's so much controversy, especially about the fire that took place, that some people can say, oh, it was destroyed and now a replacement came out,
There's
or
no
like,
controversy in the scientific community, though.
oh, like when I say controversy, disagreement, I should say then, between that and what the people who have the devotion to the Shroud of Turin, and so the church is having studies done and encouraging people to study it. Now, could there be a conflict of interest with it being a course that they're providing?
The church is not having studies done. That's partially what annoys me so much. The church is forbidding studies. People are requesting to do studies, and the church is
Mhm.
saying, "Nope, we own it. We're not going to let you have any samples." But they'll gladly make money off of it while they refuse to submit it for more testing. Come
Interesting.
on. Come on. I know a lot of Dale from Real Seekers.
Hmm.
He personally knows people like Giulio Fonti, who's
Hmm.
like a pro shroud dude.
Yeah.
And I know for a fact that Giulio Fonti and people like him have requested more samples so that they can do more testing. And the church has ignored all of these requests. They've done so since the 1980 disaster of the Nature article. Why? This is where the cynical part of me comes out, because the church doesn't care. The church knows they can make money off the shroud and knows that they have nothing to gain and everything to lose by submitting the sample for more testing. Why? Because they're pretty sure it's medieval. And so they're like, let's ignore that and let's just, you know. So
I
that's
can't make any promises, Kevin, but I did ask the guy that owns the agency and the office that I work for. I told him that, hey, I've got this little thing I do on the side, like, because he had gone to Rome for to propose to his now fiance, and I was like, me, like, I got to know, how was Rome? Is it worth the trip? And he told, and as part of it was like, hey, so if you ever get the chance to go to Rome, let me know, and I'll get you the inside scoop with this guy. And that's how I found out. And so I said, well, can you do me another favor instead of that? Can we get like an email or something? Because like I would love to get more information about it. And I'm not gonna lie, I was thinking of the questions you would want to ask him.
Ooh.
So I do appreciate you bringing that to my attention, so that way then I can like, hey, so I know that this is something that's going on, and this is so I'm gonna make a note of that. I can't make promises because, like I said, he's the owner of 5 offices across Texas, um, and got a lot going on. But when he says he'll do something, he'll do it. Maybe not like quickly or immediately, but it'll get done. So I'll keep that in mind if that does pan out, and we'll see where we go from there.
I would love to see some of these folks have their feet put to the fire. I would love to do it myself. Um, and I promise, if anybody's watching this, to be polite while I do it. But
I mean, you put my feet to the fire. I feel maybe my feet are just calloused, but I always feel like we have good conversations, anyways.
yeah, I mean, I like to think that I'm capable of asking hard questions without being a jerk. You know.
Yeah.
Oh, but
But
hey,
no, I will definitely keep that in mind because that is a good thing to consider. Like, hey, so I know that we've got these classes and everything going on, yet the church no longer is allowing studies, and there's people that I know that feel like that this is underhanded or not intellectually honest.
it's a vote of no confidence, is what that
Yeah.
is. It tells me
So
that the church does not think that it's authentic.
yeah. So why like why should people like these individuals believe it if the church itself is no longer allowing testing on it, if they're still providing classes and studies about it
Mm-hmm.
but not testing?
Yeah, yeah. It's I'd love to hear an answer to that. So if you do get a question to ask, if you do get an opportunity to ask that question, I would be very keen on learning what the answer is.
I will definitely let you know on that.
Awesome.
But yeah, to get back, like the whole thing with miracles, like I think the reason why people overuse miracle arguments is, one, they're easy, two, they're convincing if you already believe in God, and then three, they misunderstand what the church is actually declaring when she declares something as a valid miracle. They're more so declaring this is a valid event for you to have a devotion to.
Yeah, I think why people want to rely on the miracle thing is because like that's how like so we used to come to knowledge from the armchair, like you kind of talked about.
Yeah.
Um, but for the past 400 or so years, the way that we come to knowledge is through the empirical process. And miracles are like the empirical process by which we might come to,
Yeah.
like they're not, but like they
Yeah.
have that illusion almost. So I think that's why I
Right.
think it comes from a good place. Like the people who
Yes.
want to rely on miracles, they're like, oh, well, this is what we do. Like, this is how we come to knowledge of things. We
Yeah.
do empirical stuff. This is
Yeah.
empirical stuff, let's. And so, like, I appreciate that. Like, the engineer in me is like, hey, great line of thinking.
He's got the wrong
got the
idea, but the
spirit.
right spirit.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I appreciate it, even if it's not, if it's like not quite on the right track or something. That's
Yeah.
fine. But I appreciate it at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so and as far as like your frustration of like, well, if it's so important to people, why don't they come on and debate it? One, it could be like, as you said, the cynical thing. Maybe they say that they believe it, but they don't actually believe it, and they're afraid to come on. The other, as you and I talked about privately, but I think will be good for the audience to hear, is even if they do sincerely believe it, when people have a debate, you and I like having the debate or the discourse just for the sake of the discourse. So even if there's nothing at stake, I still love coming on and having a conversation. A lot of people, though, especially the ones that make their career out of online engagement, they need something to be at stake. And so if you're inviting these big name people who are big proponents for it to try to defend it, even if they lose, nothing's lost. So there's nothing at stake. So while a lot of your audience would probably click on it, a lot of their audience might not click on it, and that's what they're worried about, is
I don't know. I think
which
their
still might
audience
be a
would click on it because I think that there's a lot more at stake than people will admit. Because like I think that for a lot of Catholics, not people like you, James,
Mhm.
not most of the people in my audience, if I'm being honest,
Yeah.
but I think that for a lot of Catholics, if you took away from them their Marian apparitions and
Miracles.
their,
Yep.
like, it's almost like they have nothing left. Like that is their Catholicism. Their Catholicism
I
is Eucharistic miracles and Marian apparitions and
yeah.
stuff.
I saw someone on the Catholicism subreddit almost having a crisis of faith because his patron saint was Padre Pio, and it was coming out where people were saying, "Oh, he faked the stigmata." And I was looking at some of the stuff, and it's like, if you don't believe the stigmata happened, some of the things that Padre Pio did definitely can make it very easy to conclude that he faked the stigmata. And all of a sudden, he's having this crisis of faith. It's like, why is he a saint if he faked the stigmata? I picked him as my patron saint. And I was like, wait a minute. If the only reason you picked him to be your patron saint was because of the stigmata, you missed the whole point to Padre Pio.
Yeah.
Like, there was a whole, like, even if he never had the stigmata, and let's say the stigmata was a sense of false piety that he had done to himself to make himself appear more pious than he actually was, there's no denying that he still lived a very devoted life to God. Misinformed in that way? Maybe. If and only if it was faked.
I do think it was faked too. I have a
I,
video
I
on
mean,
Padre Pio.
yeah, I mean, I kind of figured, but I wanted it to be clear for myself so that way people
Yeah.
didn't get,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
if and only if it was twisted. And I'm granting, for the sake of this discussion, that it was faked. He still lived a very pious life and lived the gospel in a way that people can follow and should follow, even without the stigmata.
If I may, though, let me kind of stick up for this poor guy having a crisis of faith. Um,
Yeah.
If you loved a saint so much that you picked his name as your confirmation name or whatever
Mm-hmm.
this guy did, and then you found out that this saint was lying, like that kind of does seem like a big deal to me, and
Yeah.
and I think that the stigmata thing, if Saint Padre Pio was faking it, I think he was lying then about it.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe he never said, "Hey everybody, I do not use my prescribed carbolic acid to
Mm-hmm.
fake my stigmata," even though in World War I soldiers were using carbolic acid to fake injuries because it makes
Mm-hmm.
the injury look really bad, but it's actually only surface level. And he did go buy carbolic acid from a pharmacy, which is really weird.
Yeah.
Like, why would Padre Pio be buying?
So this is my response to it, and it kind of goes again to the previous conversation we had about like the surface level knowledge. And you're like, well, I can name, the from the traditional community, they would say something like, oh, I can name look at all the saints I can name and everything else. When you really look at the lives of the saints, they weren't perfect. Francis of Assisi partied, and while this might be speculation on my part, considering the community he grew up in and the town that he grew up in and everything else, probably knew some women intimately. That is pure speculation on my part, just based on like historical information and things like that. And then he had a moment that changed his life around. I guarantee you, he still had moments of failure. I guarantee you that Saint John Vianney, the cure of Ars, there's a legend saying that demons appeared at the side of his bed,
beat him up every night,
wailing and lamenting, saying, if there were 3 more priests like him, our kingdom would be destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
He almost did one of the worst things that a priest could do, which is abandon his flock twice. And he was stopped both times by his community.
But I think importantly though, like in the case of Saint John Vianney,
Hmm.
he didn't. And in the case of Saint
Right.
Francis of Assisi, he gave away all of his earthly possessions when he was like 18 or something like that. Like,
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
and Saint Padre Pio died with the stigmata. Now, of course, once he was so sick that the doctors took off his gloves, it had miraculously healed somehow. We don't know how, but his
mhm.
stigmata was not
Yeah,
present on his body when he died. Um,
yeah.
but like he went to his death with this lie, if it is a lie.
If yeah,
So that could
the
be
point.
a difference maker.
Yeah, and the point that I'm getting at here is when you really understand the lives of the saints, you understand that even when they had their conversion process and were living devoted to Christ, they weren't perfect even still. Um,
And you're right,
I
of
think
course.
I think an example that we can all agree on is Mother Teresa. The church has declared her a saint amongst great controversy. But the fact of the matter is whether she was right or wrong to do what she did, she did it. And if you talk to the people that actually know her, they can attest that like she did it because she wanted to provide not health treatment but human treatment. And I think that's where a lot of the confusion comes from, is they misinterpret her ministry
I
as
agree.
health.
I think Mother Teresa is broadly maligned. Like I don't think that she
Mhm.
deserves the hate that she
Deserves,
gets,
yeah.
broadly speaking.
But even if the hate is half correct, or there's truth within what the hate is saying, and that what she did was wrong, and we should be morally repulsed for her accepting money from a tyrant who, you know,
I own a smartphone. Like I'm no better, you know. Like I
I agree. But the point that I'm getting at is like, even if that was true, and that is an extreme moral evil, it doesn't discredit the way that she devoted her life to Christ. And that's what a sainthood is this is someone that has devoted their life to
okay.
Christ.
So you're not wrong. However, I think that what a sainthood is to most people, like to just your
Hmm.
average lay Catholic, is not
Yep.
at all what you just described. Um,
And that's the problem.
I agree. I agree. But like go read like the Golden Legend, you know? Like so
Hmm.
for whatever reason, the Golden Legends entry on St. Andrew is coming to mind. And St. Andrew gets nailed to a cross, but in the shape of an X because he didn't want to be and then
Saint Peter was the one that said that, like, I can't be
it's
crucified in the way of my
funny.
Lord.
There's different legends that seem to
Really?
like mix them up
Because
and stuff. The
I've
Golden
never
Legend
heard that
was
from
written
Saint
in
Andrew.
like the 13th century or something.
Uh-huh.
It's like there's no way that this is accurate. Um,
Yeah.
but then Saint Andrew spends like 3 days on the cross
Hmm.
preaching to people and converting them. Like,
Yeah, I
come
heard
on, like,
one
but the whole
one
point,
I heard was a saint was beheaded, his head rolled down the hill. He walked down,
yes,
picked up his head, and finished his sermon before
yes,
dying.
yeah, right. But my point in recounting this story and like just go through the entire Golden Legend is that
Hmm.
saints are just superheroes from antiquity. Like they are larger than life characters who don't have flaws. Like that's the whole point. Like that's why they're saints. Now, obviously, they had flaws. You know, Saint Francis of
Hmm.
Assisi was a partier, and Saint Augustine was a partier, and whatever. But like the whole
Yeah.
point is that these people are superheroes. You know,
Yeah.
sure they're just like us in the sense that they're also human beings, but like they're not just like us. They are larger than life characters. Um,
Yeah.
and so I think that most Catholics, like I don't think I'm over speaking here. Most
It
Catholics,
it wasn't until I saw that post, and there was a few others where that have, or several other interactions since then where people have expressed a similar sentiment, not necessarily on Padre Pio, but just in saints in general. And I'm like,
yeah,
I've got a really unique perspective on sainthood that most of the Catholic
yes,
community doesn't have.
Yeah, agreed.
and
And I
that's
think
scary.
you're right. That's the thing. I think you're right. I just don't think that very many Catholics kind of share this perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, that's why like I did restarted the whole channel, and the more that I'm doing it, the more I'm realizing that there is a lot of misinformation out there. And that whole video I did of like atheists, less than you think, how we kind of talked about like it's true on both sides, which was the point of the video, but it was meant to be clickbaity to get people interacting with it, is so true that Catholics know less than they think, and it's less than I feared.
Yeah. I mean,
Which isn't me trying to boast. It's a statement to the failure of the church in caring for the flock in this capacity.
yeah. But that's why we are so grateful for channels like yours,
Thank you.
to step in. And hey, I'm looking at the time, and I'm also realizing that I should go like actually eat dinner at some point.
But that's right, because you did tell me you were tight for time when you jumped on here. That's right,
I've been
because
like work. I know it's Sunday, but I've literally been working, just trying to catch up on work.
you're a heathen. You can work Sundays.
Yes, it's allowed. It's yeah. Um, no, but so my proverbial forever last question, James, is if we wanted to find more from you, where would we find you?
Uh, you can find me a lot on Debate a Catholic. That's where I am very active in. I'm also very active in the Catholic Apologetics Discord server. And for just video essays, you can find me on Catholic Thinker. Uh, I'm not able to post as much as I would like, but I do have something where I've got the script done, just need to find time to record it, where it's looking at the interaction of free will and eternity.
Awesome, awesome. Links in the description down below, at least to James's channel and to maybe the subreddits. I'm not sure if they're not there. I'll add them later. But James, thanks again so much for coming on. Everybody in the audience, thank you for watching and participating. And I will see you next time. Ooh, interesting. Like why